Welcome, scholars and defenders of the Imperium, to Part 3 of our exploration into the Taros Campaign. In our last lecture, we witnessed the valiant yet harrowing struggles of our brave Imperial forces as they faced relentless assaults from the Tau. Time and again, our soldiers exhibited unmatched courage, enduring grueling battles and sustaining heavy losses in their tireless efforts to reclaim Taros. The indomitable spirit of the Imperium shone through their perseverance, even as they were pushed to the brink of defeat. Today, we delve deeper into the final tragic chapters of this conflict. We shall examine the desperate evacuations, the heroic last stands, and the ultimate sacrifice made by so many in the face of overwhelming odds. We will recount the fall of key regiments, the strategic withdrawals, and the critical role played by the Raptors chapter in safeguarding the remnants of our forces. Through this lecture, we aim to honor the memory of those who fought and fell on Taros, to learn from their experiences, and to better understand the broader implications of this campaign on the Imperium's ongoing struggle against its myriad enemies. As we proceed, let us remember the valor and dedication of our predecessors and draw inspiration from their unyielding resolve in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. So please sit and listen closely. By what seemed a providential act, the location of the Tau Supreme Headquarters had been divinely placed into the hands of Commissar General Van Horsich. Seizing this critical opportunity, Van Horsich devised a plan for a decisive strike, Operation Deathblow, that could alter the war's course in one fell swoop. For this daring mission, he would require the collaboration of Lord Commander Gustavus, Colonel Shea, and the lethal skills of the Officio Assassinorum. Upon presentation of his strategy, Gustavus consented to the plan, but with a crucial stipulation. The entire operation would be entrusted to Colonel Shea. Recognized for his meticulous planning and execution capabilities, the colonel orchestrated this critical strike to eliminate the Tau command structure in one decisive action. Van Horsich agreed to this arrangement and took immediate steps to reinforce the mission's chances of success. He dispatched a priority astro-telepathic message to request an agent from the Officio Assassinorum be sent to Taros, an agent from the Eversor Temple, renowned for their ferocity and unrelenting aggression. The sanctioning of this request marked the preparation for what was understood to be a suicidal mission. The Eversor assassin, known among his peers as Long Knife, was expected to not survive the encounter with the Tau. However, the nature of Eversor assassins assured that he would not be the only casualty. No enemy that encountered him would likely survive. This mission, steeped in desperation and hope, was a stark embodiment of the grim resolve and sacrificial tactics often employed by the Imperium in its darkest hours. Armed with critical intelligence about the Tau headquarters, Colonel Shea meticulously crafted his mission strategy, which was structured around two specialized strike teams. Red Team would consist solely of the assassin. This lone warrior would be clandestinely inserted into the desert, tasked with directly infiltrating the Tau base. Once inside, the assassin was to eliminate any and all targets, ensuring complete destruction within the enemy stronghold. Simultaneously, Blue Team, composed of a hand-picked Stormtrooper Company platoon, would play a crucial role. These elite soldiers were to be deployed via Valkyries, tasked with executing a high-intensity diversionary attack on the Tau defenses. The chaos and confusion wrought by Blue Team were designed to draw attention and resources away from the primary target, thereby facilitating Red Team's approach and increasing the probability of reaching and eliminating the Tau leadership. This dual-pronged approach leveraged both stealth and overt aggression. The coordination of these teams was paramount. The mission's success hinged on the precise execution of each team's role, highlighting the strategic acumen and decisive action characteristic of the Imperium's military operations. The mission Colonel Shedger was planning, codenamed Operation Deathblow, demanded the utmost in courage and sacrifice. Recognizing the extreme risk involved in striking deep into enemy territory against a highly fortified target, only volunteers were to be recruited for the stormtrooper units. This mission was expected to be a one-way trip for many, if not all, who participated. Fully aware of the perilous nature of the task, Colonel Shedger, embodying the spirit of sacrifice that defines the Imperium's military leadership, requested to personally command the Blue Team. This decision effectively signed what he knew could be his own death warrant. The aircraft crews from the 71st Tactical Wing 2 would be composed entirely of volunteers, for they faced a similarly grim prospect. Reaching the target area would deplete their fuel reserves, rendering a return trip impossible. Instead, their Valkyries would have to be ditched in the hostile desert. The crews were instructed to destroy their aircraft post-drop to prevent any recovery or use by enemy forces. Equipped with survival kits, these men would then face the daunting task of trekking back to Imperial lines, with the genuine threat of capture by Tau patrols looming over them. As preparations for Operation Deathblow advanced, the timing hinged on the readiness of the Red Team. This lone assassin would need to be fully briefed, equipped with all necessary target information, and strategically deployed to maximize the chances of success. In the meantime, Colonel Shedger visited the Stormtrooper Company, where he successfully rallied 30 volunteers willing to face almost certain death. Knowing the stakes, these soldiers stepped forward to serve the Imperium, ready to lay down their lives in what promised to be one of the most daring operations of the Taros Campaign. On the date marked 684, amid an influx of supplies, the transport vessel Son of Jucha made its triumphant arrival within the Taros system, docking with the Righteous Power. Its cargo, critical to the ongoing war effort, included not only war materials and fuel, but also a large, ominous black container guarded by 4 Adeptus Mechanicus tech priests. Hidden within this container was a biostasis chamber, and inside it, suspended in a bath of amniotic fluids, lay one of the most fearsome instruments of death in the Imperium's arsenal, an Eversor assassin. This assassin was no ordinary fighter. It was a bioengineered psychopath, a one-man killing machine crafted for the singular purpose of hunting and eliminating its targets without pause or remorse. As soon as the cargo was secured, preparations for its deployment began immediately. The Eversor was subjected to hypnosuggestion, programming it with the details of its mission, including its target's specific location and identities. Once the programming was firmly embedded in its mind, the still unconscious assassin was armed with its signature weaponry, a power sword for close combat, a neuro-gauntlet to enhance its already formidable physical prowess, and an executioner pistol loaded with toxins specially formulated by the Eversor Temple to disrupt Tau neurology, ensuring death within seconds. Additionally, a self-destruct mechanism was surgically implanted within the assassin's chest, set to detonate if its biological functions ceased, ensuring that even in death, the Eversor would remain a lethal threat. With the assassin fully equipped and the mission parameters set, the tech priests chanted a final litany over the biostasis chamber. The chamber was then meticulously secured inside a drop pod launched from the Righteous Power, hurtling down toward the unsuspecting desert world of Taros below. This marked the beginning of what was intended to be a decisive and terminal phase in the conflict, embodying the ruthless efficiency and cold brutality for which the Imperium of Man is both revered and feared. The drop pod descended toward Taros, landing unobtrusively 60 kilometers from its target. While still airborne, concealed indicator lights within the stasis pod flickered to life, initiating the revival protocols of the dormant Eversor assassin encased inside. The first sign of reanimation was subtle. a neuro-gauntleted hand tensing into a fist. As the pod made contact with the desert terrain, unnoticed by any, the life support systems efficiently expelled the amniotic fluids and the chamber opened with a sharp hiss. Restraint bolts detonated remotely, and the tangle of umbilical cords and sensor needles swiftly retracted from the figure now stirring to life. Freed from its confinement, the assassin emerged into the waning daylight. It paused briefly, and a momentary survey was conducted to assess the immediate vicinity for potential threats. Assured of solitude, the assassin commenced its trek across the desert sands. With movements calculated and low, maintaining an optimal profile for speed and stealth, it advanced, its executioner pistol held at the ready. Red Team was operational and on schedule. By nightfall, it would reach the proximity of its target, prepared to strike with lethal precision. This solitary figure, a synthesis of bioengineering and ruthless training, moved with a single purpose, eliminating its designated targets. As Colonel Sheja's stormtroopers hurtled across the desert skies in their Valkyries, flying low to elude detection, the urgency of their mission hung palpably in the air. Their orders were clear: assault their target with unrestrained force, and sustain the offensive relentlessly. Unbeknownst to them, save for Sheya, the true crux of the operation lay elsewhere, in the form of a lone Eversaur assassin, a weapon of destruction whose approach was cloaked in secrecy. The three Valkyries, gliding just above the desert floor, managed to avoid detection until an early warning system operated by a drone at the Tau base triggered an alert. Reacting with swift precision, Tau defense teams scrambled to their battle stations, readying their weapons as the threat became imminent. The Valkyries executed a tactical maneuver, flaring briefly to hover as the stormtroopers deployed, repelling the final few meters to the sand below. As the troops hit the ground, the Tau unleashed a barrage of fire into the darkness. The Imperial forces responded with equal intensity, their advance under the cover of night illuminated by the staccato bursts of pulse rounds and tracer fire. Amidst this chaos, the stormtroopers pressed forward, low and determined, braving the hostile onslaught. Above them, the Valkyries, too engaged in the battle, circled back, their multi-lasers cutting brilliant paths through the night sky as they provided cover fire for their comrades below. This orchestrated symphony of aerial and ground assault was designed to distract and weaken, setting the stage for the assassin's critical strike. Colonel Sheja and his squad advanced towards the target buildings under cover of night, maneuvering deftly through a hail of pulse rifle fire. Finding brief respite behind the nearest structure, Sheja swiftly extracted a frag grenade from his harness, armed it, and hurled it through an open window. The resulting explosion cleared the way for him to unleash a series of plasma pistol rounds into the breached space. Capitalizing on the chaos, his men surged forward, storming through the doors to secure control of the building. Meanwhile, amidst the tumult and disarray of the battlefield, a sinister presence made its stealthy approach toward the main Tau compound. Cloaked in black and masked with a ghastly pale skull, the Eversaur assassin moved like a spectre in the night. A Tau fire warrior, momentarily distracted by reloading, lifted his eyes only to meet the chilling gaze of the assassin standing before him. In a flash, the Eversaur thrust the needle-sharp spikes of its neuro-gauntlet into the warrior's neck. The Tau fell, racked by convulsions as the potent toxin swiftly ravaged his nervous system, rendering him lifeless in an instant. With relentless efficiency, the assassin continued, undeterred by the enveloping darkness or the ongoing chaos around it. It located the entrance it had been methodically searching for. In moments, the Eversaur placed a melter charge on the doorway, set the timer, and stepped back into the shadows. As the explosive detonated, tearing open the entry, the assassin burst into a sprint, vaulting through the flaming wreckage and down into the bowels of the compound. The fury of battle above was a mere backdrop to the silent, deadly intent of the Eversaur, as it delved deeper into the enemy's stronghold, driven by an unquenchable thirst for destruction. Within the dim, cramped corridors of the Tau Command Center, the Eversaur assassin struck with lethal precision and utter surprise. Its initial salvo from the needle pistol sent 2 Tau warriors crashing against the far wall, their lives extinguished instantly by the fast-acting toxins. The assassin rolled forward without breaking stride, evading the panicked return fire from other defenders. Rising swiftly, it fired again, felling a 3rd and 4th Tau with the same deadly efficiency. With its magazine expended, the assassin discarded the pistol and continued its relentless advance. As it navigated the low corridors, 2 more Tau defenders charged, desperation clear in their actions. The assassin ducked beneath their fire, swept the legs from the first attacker, then lunged to impale the second on its gleaming power blade. Each movement of the Eversaur was a fluid, unstoppable force of violence, leaving behind only destruction. The bodies of the fallen enemies lay in a grotesque tableau, their final gurgling breaths echoing off the stark metal walls. With no pause, the black-clad figure of death moved through the next doorway, entering the heart of the Tau Command Center, where the leaders of the enemy's operations on Taros unknowingly awaited their grim fate. In the starkly lit control center of the Tau headquarters, the scene was one of impending doom as the Eversaur assassin entered. The room was momentarily quiet, the air thick with tension. The Ethereal and his 2 bodyguards were facing the assassin, their slender, robed figures stark against the technological backdrop. With fearless resolve and mechanical precision, the assassin launched into action, power sword gleaming in one hand and neurogauntlet poised with the other. The Ethereal, a figure revered among his people, found himself with no avenue for escape, trapped by the confines of the command center. The assassin's neurogauntlet moved with deadly efficiency, slashing through the air, swiftly incapacitating the bodyguards who fell, convulsing from the excruciating pain delivered by the potent toxins. As the bodyguards hit the ground, additional Tau forces burst into the room, desperate to protect their leader. They opened fire immediately, their pulse rifles lighting up the space with deadly intent. The assassin was struck multiple times and knocked down but remained undeterred. From the ground, it reached out with its neurogauntlet, catching the Ethereal's ankle as he attempted to maneuver away. Tripped by the sudden assault, the Ethereal crashed to the floor beside the assassin. More pulse fire followed, the bodyguards aiming to neutralize the threat once and for all. The shots hit the Eversaur squarely, blood splattering the walls and floor in a gruesome display. Yet even as its life ebbed away, the Eversaur clung fiercely to the Ethereal, a haunting laugh escaping its lips with its final rattling breath. As Colonel Shager and his troops continued their relentless engagement with the Tau defenders, the air was suddenly split by a massive explosion deep within the enemy's compound. Colonel Shager instinctively sought cover from his tactical position, shielding himself as fiery debris rained down, casting the battlefield into a storm of light and shadow. Around him, his soldiers followed suit, ducking under whatever protection they could find as embers and ash swirled in the heated air. The Tau warriors, caught mid-assault, could only pause and stare in utter horror and dismay. Their command center, once the nerve center of their operations, was now an engulfing inferno. Thick smoke billowed out from the shattered windows and doors, and flames leapt high into the sky, painting a stark picture of devastation against the darkening horizon. For the Tau, the sight was not just a tactical disaster, but a profound personal loss. Their revered Ethereal had been inside, and there was no doubt that no one could have survived such a catastrophic blast. The explosion's impact resonated far beyond the immediate physical destruction, sending ripples of shock and a sudden shift in morale through both the Tau and Imperial ranks. For Colonel Shager's men, this unexpected turn of events brought a grim sort of encouragement, galvanizing them with renewed vigor as they grasped the scale of their impact on the enemy's leadership. Meanwhile, the Tau forces were visibly shaken, their coherence faltering in the face of such an immense loss. providing the Imperium forces with a critical advantage in the ongoing battle. As the command center was engulfed in flames, Colonel Shedger and his stormtroopers continued their fight, undeterred by the chaos around them. However, Tau reinforcements quickly arrived, tipping the battle balance decisively. The colonel and his men, surrounded and outnumbered, fought bravely but were ultimately overwhelmed and slain. In the wake of the destruction of their command center, the Tau showed no inclination for mercy, fueled by a desire for retribution. Operation Deathblow, while a suicide mission, had come perilously close to achieving its full objective. The ethereal Envoy was indeed killed in the attack, delivering a severe blow to the Tau forces. However, Chateau Rumaire, the military leader of the Tau on Taros, had fortuitously been away from the control center, leading his bodyguards in direct combat against the Imperial attackers. Although he sustained injuries, his survival meant that Tau leadership remained intact, albeit severely shaken. The immediate aftermath of the explosion and the death of their ethereal plunged the Tau coalition forces into a state of shock and mourning. The ethereal's death sent ripples of grief through their ranks, temporarily paralyzing their operational capabilities. Yet as the initial shock subsided, it was replaced by a profound and collective rage. This emotional transition from grief to vengeance rekindled the fighting spirit of the Tau, transforming their campaign's rallying cry from "for the greater good" to a thirst for revenge with "for en vrai" echoing across the desert sands. This shift marked a dark turn in the conflict on Taros, setting the stage for a brutal continuation of hostilities. The Tau, driven by loss and fury, were now more determined than ever to punish those responsible for the death of their revered leader. The stage was set for a relentless pursuit of vengeance that would see no quarter given to the Imperial forces. Following a week of paralyzing grief and inactivity, the Tau redirected their immense fury towards the Imperial Guard regiments retreating through the desert. Abandoning defensive maneuvers, they launched a fierce offensive intended to crush the Imperial Guard and bring the war to a swift conclusion. Chateau Rumaire took charge, reorganizing his remaining hunter cadres for the impending assault. Although the Imperium's forces were severely battered, they had not yet been vanquished. Recognizing the dire situation, Lord Commander Gustavus ordered evacuation of all surviving personnel on Taros. The campaign, which had spanned a mere 90 days from the first ship's arrival, had failed. Despite his outrage, Commissar General Van Horsich acknowledged the futility of further resistance. With the evacuation order in place, his remaining task was to salvage as many forces as possible before they, too, succumbed to the relentless Tau assault. With the Tau now on the offensive, the withdrawal of the Talon forces accelerated rapidly. The threat of enemy forces, whether imagined or real, loomed constantly over them, causing the guardsmen to retreat in a chaotic rush towards the landing zones. What had once been a vast army moving with military precision was now at risk of devolving into a disorganized rabble. The desert quickly turned into a dumping ground as guardsmen abandoned their vehicles and equipment in their desperate bid for survival. Hundreds of Chimera and Lehman Russ hulls soon dotted the barren landscape. At the same time, officers struggled in vain to impose order and keep their squads, platoons, and companies intact. Amidst the chaos, commissars sternly barked warnings, declaring that any man seen discarding his weapon would be treated as a deserter and shot. Long columns of exhausted guardsmen trudged south through the desert, moving slowly past countless abandoned Lehman Russ and Chimera vehicles, their fuel tanks long since empty. Rations and water canteens became the only valued items, with heavy weapons and even spare ammunition discarded along the way. Desperate men rummaged through the hulks of tanks and chimeras, searching for overlooked water cans and looted canteens from the dead of previous battles, shaking out the last few drops in a frantic bid for survival. Tormented by thirst, the entirety of 10th Corps streamed southward, retracing the ground they had fought so hard to claim. It was a broken army, no longer capable of making a stand. With their enemy in full retreat, the Tau seized the opportunity to exact their long-desired revenge. The fleeing guardsmen became easy targets as barracudas and tiger sharks took off incessantly, laying waste to the retreating army. Orcas deployed combat teams that mercilessly ambushed the retreating Talon guardsmen, either slaughtering them or capturing them as prisoners. As the Tau attacks intensified and news of ambushes spread, the disorganized retreat rapidly descended into a chaotic rout, becoming a complete shambles within 4 days. Some officers attempted to organize rearguard actions to hold off the Tau and buy time for those ahead. Still, these efforts were in vain, as all ad hoc rearguard units were wiped out in futile firefights. In the aftermath of the evacuation order, the Tau efficiently mopped up the remnants, taking thousands of prisoners and marching them away to captivity. For many, capture was preferable to dying of thirst under the merciless sun. While a few stragglers made it through, the majority did not. To all intents and purposes, 4 Talon regiments had ceased to exist. Only the 331st Regiment of 10th Corps managed to withdraw in good order, with thousands being evacuated in the following days. The 114th Cadian Regiment also fared relatively well, with their chimeras loaded with men racing southward until their fuel ran out, after which they marched the remaining distance. Most of the regiment survived, though many of their chimeras did not. The remaining Titans of Legio Ignatum also returned intact, and on Tecmagus Volta's direct orders were immediately taken to safety. Disorder reigned at the landing grounds as crowds of desperate guardsmen, terrified of being left to the mercy of the Tau, clamored to board the transports. Commissars and stormtroopers fought a losing battle to maintain order, brandishing loaded weapons and shooting those who breached their cordon. High-ranking officers and essential administratum officials were the first to board. At the same time, much of the remaining space was occupied by equipment, deemed far more irreplaceable than the plentiful guardsmen at the Imperium's disposal. The Raptors chapter had fallen responsible for protecting the landing zone. Captain Aurelius's Space Marines redeployed to Taros and established a defensive perimeter around the landing grounds, often occupying the fortifications originally constructed by the Talon regiments when they first arrived. At the year 769, dawn broke as a yellow molten orb over the mountains, signaling the onset of another blisteringly hot day. Soon, the heat haze shimmered across the desert as the Raptors' sentries scanned the sands. With the yellow dawn came the distinctive swept-wing shapes of Tau mantas, approaching low like massive birds of prey, hovering in the dusty heat haze to disembark their hunter cadres. The Emperor's forces were beaten, yet the Tau's thirst for revenge remained insatiable. Chateau Remir ordered one last attack directly against the landing grounds. Any who did not escape now would be stranded on Taros forever. However, the Space Marines of the Raptors chapter stood between the Tau and the landing zone. As the Tau ferried in their forces and mustered for the attack, the Space Marines reinforced their defenses with whatever reserves Captains Aurelius and Cades could muster, bracing themselves for one final battle. Their objective was to buy time for the evacuating troops. If the Space Marines' defenses broke, the landing grounds would also be overrun. The longer the Raptors could hold, the more troops would escape to fight another day. The first thrust came from the east. Supported by long-range fire from mantas hovering on the distant horizon, enormous railgun rounds began to impact the defensive positions, flinging rock and earth skywards. Following close behind, hammerheads and broadside battlesuits joined the fusillade, their rounds slamming into Space Marine positions. Fire warriors and battlesuits, led by Chateau Remire, closed in, met by Space Marine heavy weapons and whirlwinds in response. The Tau closed within 200 meters of the dug-in Space Marines, but their attack faltered there. Soon, hammerheads and battlesuits were burning fiercely in the morning light, with dozens of Tau corpses littering the sand. Those fortunate enough to survive the Raptors' counterattack retreated, their offensive broken. A second assault came from the west, with much greater force. Once again, railgun rounds slammed into the defensive positions. Once again, the Raptors stood firm, fighting fiercely to hold back the oncoming tide. A manta closed in, bombarding the entrenchments with volleys of missiles. Captain Cadiz committed his last reserves, dispatching 6th Company land speeders to attack the manta at close range. The small skimmers dodged and weaved as heavy bolters rattled and multi-melters roared. 3 were destroyed in the battle, but the manta withdrew, unwilling to risk further damage. A Tau hammerhead gunship unleashed the long-range firepower of its railgun, posing a constant threat to Imperial tank columns. As losses mounted, Captain Cadiz moved from dugout to dugout, directing counterfire and urging his hard-pressed battle brothers on. During the fierce combat, a plasma blast that immolated a Predator tank also critically wounded Cadiz, peppering him with molten shrapnel. He was dragged to safety, his upper torso and right arm mutilated by the intense heat. Only the skill of an apothecary and his superhuman physique kept Cadiz alive. Though he would never fight again as he had on so many battlefields, his valor earned him the honor of being interred in a dreadnought upon his return to the Chapter Fortress. By mid-afternoon, the Tau forces were spent. They had battered relentlessly at the Space Marine positions, but failed to break them. Meanwhile, the last landing craft hurriedly loaded their human cargo as the sounds of battle reverberated around them. Hordes of guardsmen crowded into the holds, and once full, the ramps were raised, and the great loading doors rolled shut. Anyone not on board now would be left on Taros for good. The liftoff of the last landing craft freed Captain Aurelius to order the evacuation of his own forces. At great cost, the Raptors had stood as the shield between the Tau and the evacuation all day. As night fell, Thunderhawks were deployed to lift the Battle Brothers to safety. By the time the Raptors' evacuation was complete, the remaining transports and their escorts were already retreating out of the system. The Raptors' battle barge would be the last Imperial vessel to leave, bringing up the rear as the fleet made the warp jump out of the Taros system. The Tau fleet did not pursue this, as new orders stayed in their hand. The prize was the Taus. They had won Taros and expanded their empire. The campaign was over. The war on Taros had cost the Imperial Guard dearly, with over 5 complete regiments lost. The 3rd and 12th Talon armoured regiments had lost all their combat vehicles and equipment. The survivors were consolidated into a reformed, understrength 3rd Regiment, which would be rebuilt. The 17th and 89th Talon regiments had disintegrated as coherent forces during the retreat, with most of their men now Tau captives condemned to labour in Taros's mines for the greater good. The remnants were absorbed into the 331st Regiment, which had fared remarkably well throughout the campaign. This regiment now boasted its first campaign honour and a corps of veterans ready to serve in future war zones. The 23rd Elysian drop troops had been nearly annihilated during Operation Comet, though they retained over 100 aircraft. The regiment would be reformed with new recruits from their home world ready to rise and fight again. The 114th Cadian Regiment had lost only several hundred men, but over 90% of its vehicles. It could be quickly re-equipped with new chimeras from war reserves. It would soon be ready for redeployment to the Cadian Gate. However, the Legio Ignatum had suffered the loss of one of its 4 Warhound Titans, deeply felt by the princeps and crews who had fought alongside it. For the Imperium, the death toll was staggering. It was estimated that 10,000 guardsmen had been killed and 15,000 more were wounded. As many as 20,000 may have been captured by the Tau. Approximately 350 tanks, over 700 chimeras, and 200 artillery pieces were lost. Aircraft losses totaled 68 out of 78. While the Tau Empire forces on the planet were assaulting the Imperium's troops, their fleet inflicted serious damage on the ships of the Imperial Navy patrolling the system. Fleet Admiral Cotto's Taros invasion fleet lost Hammer of Thrace, the light cruiser Cerberus, and 8 escorts. The battle cruisers Righteous Power and Black Duke were damaged. Before returning to duty, they would require significant repairs at the Kar Duniash shipyards. Aside from losing so many fighting men, vehicles, and craft, the Tau Empire's capture of Taros had broader implications for the Imperium. The mining world's resources had been earmarked for the escalating war effort against Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade. While other sources of ore could supply the forges of Styges VIII, delays were inevitable. Shaso Ramaya commanded a Tau coalition estimated to include at least 100 hunter cadres, totaling between 8,000 and 9,000 fire warriors and possibly as many as 5,000 Kroot allies. Additionally, over 8,000 human deserters had joined the Tau cause. Actual Tau Empire numbers and losses throughout and after the battle remained unknown to the Imperium. Still, they were believed to be in the thousands. The Imperial fleet confirmed the destruction of only one custodian-class carrier, the Aho, and 8 escort vessels. Following their victory, the planet and its mineral resources were firmly in Tau hands. In the subsequent years, the Tau solidified their control over Taros. As their young empire expanded, ships from Tau and Dalaith arrived in orbit, bringing Xenos colonists to the planet. Meanwhile, the Imperium could not strike back as other priorities took precedence. Another invasion would require a greater force than that sent to Taros under Lord Commander Gustavus. This force was not feasible at the time. There would be no second invasion for the foreseeable future. With Tyros secure, the ethereal councillors on Tau shifted their gaze to the new borders of their empire, eyeing the next world for conquest.